the sound of a wooden spoon scraping the bottom of a clay pot, the smell of dried chilies toasting on a comal at 6 in the morning. If you grew up in a Texas kitchen with an abuela who never opened a cookbook, those sounds and smells are part of you. She cooked by feel, by taste, by decades of watching her own mother do the same thing. The dishes she made were simple and filling, built for a family that worked hard and came home hungry. But somewhere between the drive-thrus and the frozen food aisle, a whole generation of Tex-Mex home cooking quietly slipped away. Number 14 on this list was once a staple in every fishing family along the Gulf, and today most young cooks have never made it from scratch. And number 5 on this list takes a part of the cow most people throw out and turns it into something unforgettable. So hit subscribe, because here are 25 forgotten Tex-Mex dishes Texas abuelas made that disappeared. Number 25. Sopa de estrellitas. This was the soup that every sick child in a Mexican-American household got before anything else. Not chicken noodle from a can. Sopa de estrellitas. Tiny star-shaped pasta cooked in a light tomato broth with a little garlic, a pinch of cumin, and enough warmth to make you feel better before the first spoonful hit your stomach. Abuelas across South Texas kept bags of those little stars in the pantry like medicine. The pasta was cheap, the broth stretched for days, and it took less than 20 minutes from stove to table. Kids loved the stars. They would fish them out with a spoon and count them. By the time you were old enough to cook for yourself, you had forgotten all about it, replaced by instant ramen and canned soup. But if you close your eyes, you can still taste it. Number 24. Arroz con chicharros. Rice with green peas sounds like nothing, and that is exactly why it disappeared. It was too simple for a generation that learned to judge food by how complicated it looked on a plate. But in the 1960s and 1970s, this was a staple in Tex-Mex kitchens from Laredo to Corpus Christi. The rice was toasted golden in a little oil before the water went in. Then a handful of frozen peas stirred through at the end, maybe a diced carrot if there was one in the fridge. It filled the gaps on a plate when the meat was small and the mouths were many. No recipe card, no measuring cup, just a practiced hand, a hot skillet, and the quiet certainty that it would taste right. Number 23. Chalupas compuestas. In San Antonio, chalupas meant something very specific. A small corn tortilla pressed flat into hot oil until it puffed and crisped at the edges, then topped with refried beans, shredded chicken or picadillo, lettuce, tomato, and a crumble of queso fresco. They were not tacos, they were not tostadas, they were chalupas, and every family had their own version. Some used lard in the beans, others added a stripe of sour cream. The tortilla had to be just the right thickness, or it would crack when you picked it up. Chalupas were party food, made in stacks of 20 or 30 for birthdays and after church gatherings. You assembled them right at the table, and they were gone in minutes. Fast food chains later borrowed the name and turned it into something unrecognizable. The original never needed a brand. Number 22. Natillas. A soft, warm custard made from milk, sugar, egg yolks, and a dusting of cinnamon on top, not baked like flan. Natillas were stirred on the stovetop, slowly, patiently, until the mixture thickened just enough to coat the back of a wooden spoon. Pour it into small bowls, let it cool, and that was dessert. In Mexican-American homes across the Rio Grande Valley, Natillas showed up after Sunday dinner and on Saints' days when something sweet was expected, but nobody wanted to fuss. The ingredients were already in the kitchen. Milk, eggs, sugar, a stick of cinnamon. Nothing to buy, nothing to plan. The trouble was the stirring. You had to stand at the stove and keep the spoon moving or the eggs would scramble. That kind of patience belonged to a generation that did not mind spending 30 minutes on a dessert. When instant pudding boxes appeared, Natillas lost the argument. Number 21. Chorizo verde. Most people today only know the red kind. Greasy, grumbly, staining everything it touches. But there was a green chorizo that abuelas in certain parts of Texas used to make from scratch using tomatillos, cilantro, serrano peppers, and ground pork. The color was vivid, almost startling. The flavor was brighter and sharper than the red version, with a tangy heat that woke you up at breakfast. The Laredo and Eagle Pass areas were especially known for it. You would find it scrambled with eggs on a Sunday morning, or tucked into a fresh flour tortilla with a squeeze of lime. It never made it onto supermarket shelves the way red chorizo did. So when the generation that made it by hand started to pass on, the recipe often went with them. Only a handful of carnicerias still carry it today. Number 20. Caldo de queso, a cheese and potato soup that came from the Sonoran Desert and settled into kitchens across the Texas border. The base was simple: roasted green chilies, diced potatoes, and chunks of fresh white cheese in a light broth. No cream, no flour, just the cheese itself melting into the hot liquid and turning it silky. In El Paso and the surrounding valley towns, this was winter food. The kind of dish you made when the temperature dropped and there was nothing fancy in the house. The potatoes stretched it. The cheese made it rich. The chiles gave it a low, steady heat that warmed you from the inside out. By the 1990s, most families had switched to canned soups and queso dip from a jar. Caldo de queso requires fresh cheese, and fresh cheese requires a trip to the right store. That was enough to kill it. Number 19. Cortadillo. In the ranchos of Nuevo Leon and the border towns of South Texas, Cortadillo was the dish that told you where a family came from. Diced beef, cut small, simmered slowly in a sauce of tomatoes, onions, and dried chilies until the meat was tender enough to fall apart with a fork. A few cubes of potato went in to stretch it, others folded in strips of roasted poblano pepper. But the foundation was always the same. Small pieces of inexpensive beef, cooked low and slow until they absorbed every drop of flavor from the sauce. The name itself comes from the Spanish word cortar, to cut, and the dish was defined by the size of the dice, not shredded like machaca, not chunks like a stew. Cortadillo was precise, each piece roughly the size of a sugar cube, and that size mattered because it determined how the meat cooked and how it held the sauce. Cooks in Laredo and McAllen served it with fresh flour tortillas and a side of frijoles. It was weeknight food, nothing special, nothing expensive, but the smell of it filling a small kitchen could stop a conversation. The reason Cortadillo disappeared has nothing to do with taste. It takes time. You cannot rush the simmer. The beef has to go from tough to tender on its own schedule, and that schedule does not fit a household where both parents work and dinner needs to be ready in 30 minutes. Pressure cookers helped for a while. Slow cookers kept it alive in some homes through the 1990s. But the generation that knew the exact color the sauce should reach before you turned the heat down, that generation is thinning out. If your abuela made cortadillo, you remember the way she would test a piece of meat between her fingers, checking the give before she called everyone to the table. Number 18. Chicharrones prensados. Regular chicharrones are the puffy fried pork rinds you can buy in a bag at any gas station. Chicharrones prensados are something else entirely. These were made by taking leftover pork cracklings, pressing them into a dense brick, and then cooking that brick down in a red chili sauce until it softened into something rich and deeply savory. The texture was unlike anything else, dense, chewy, almost meaty, even though it was technically just rendered pork skin compressed and rehydrated. Abuelas in Monterrey and along the Texas border would buy prensados in flat slabs from the carniceria and simmer them with salsa roja for tacos that could feed a whole family on a few dollars. The taste was smoky and intense. Today, most people under 40 have never seen a prensado, let alone cooked one. Number 17. Bocoles. If you have never heard of a bocole, you're not alone. Even in South Texas, where they were once a morning staple, the name draws blank stares from anyone under 50. A bocole is a thick, round cake of fresh masa, split open like a pocket, and stuffed with whatever the kitchen had that day. Refried beans and crumbled queso, fresco, chicharron in salsa, scrambled egg with dried shrimp during Lent. The dough was patted out by hand, thicker than a tortilla but smaller across, and cooked on a dry comal until the outside formed a firm crust, while the inside stayed soft and steamy. Abuelas in the Tamaulipas border region and the lower Rio Grande Valley made them every morning without thinking twice. The masa was fresh, ground that day or the day before, and the fat mixed into the dough gave the bocole a richness that a plain tortilla could never match. Bocoles were not delicate. They were built to hold up through a long morning of physical work. Ranch hands carried them wrapped in cloth, and by the time they sat down to eat, the filling had soaked into the masa, turning the whole thing into a single dense bite of flavor. The reason bocoles vanished is the same reason most handmade masa dishes vanished. Fresh masa requires a mill or a very strong arm and a metate. When families moved into cities and started buying tortillas from a store, the daily ritual of grinding and patting and cooking fresh masa simply stopped. Bocoles needed that ritual more than most, because without fresh masa, the texture was wrong and the pocket would not hold. A few taquerias in Brownsville and Matamoros still serve them, but the homemade version, split open and stuffed at the kitchen table before sunrise, is nearly extinct. Number 16. Ceviche de camaron. Long before ceviche showed up on trendy restaurant menus with edible flowers and microgreens, Abuelas along the Gulf Coast were making their own version with shrimp from the Brownsville docks. The shrimp was cooked, not raw, because raw seafood in a South Texas summer was a risk nobody took. Chopped tomato, white onion, cucumber, cilantro, and enough lime juice to make your eyes water. Served cold in a tall glass with saltine crackers on the side. It was Sunday afternoon food, the kind of thing you ate under a shade tree after church while the kids ran around in the yard. Every family had a hot sauce preference. Some reached for Valentina, others swore by Tapatio. A few made their own from dried chiles de árbol. The restaurant version today costs $15 and tastes nothing like it. Number 15. Pan de campo. This was cowboy bread, ranch bread, the kind of thing you baked in a cast-iron Dutch oven buried in mesquite coals out in the middle of nowhere. The dough was simple: flour, lard, salt, baking powder, and just enough water to bring it together. No yeast, no rising time, no oven with a thermostat. Vaqueros and ranch families along the Texas border made pan de campo wherever they happened to be. Out on the range, at deer camps, in backyards during weekend cookouts. The Dutch oven sat in a shallow pit of hot coals, with more coals piled on the lid. And in 20 minutes, you had a crusty golden round of bread that tore apart in soft, flaky layers. The lard was the secret. It made the bread tender in a way that butter or oil never could. When families moved off the ranches and into houses with electric stoves, the Dutch oven went into the garage. Pan de campo needs an open fire and a feel for how hot the coals are, and that is a skill that does not transfer to a kitchen. Number 14. Caldo de pescado. Along the Gulf Coast from Brownsville to Port Isabel, fishing families made this soup the way other families made coffee, without thinking about it, almost every day. Whatever came off the boat that morning went into the pot. Red snapper heads, drum filets, sometimes a catfish if that was the catch. The base was tomato, onion, garlic, and a dried guajillo chili or two for color and warmth. The fish went in last because it cooked fast and fell apart if you left it too long. Potatoes and chunks of chayote stretched the broth. A handful of cilantro went in at the end, right before it hit the table, along with a wedge of lime squeezed over the top. The soup was thin and clean, not creamy, not heavy. It tasted like the coast itself. Abuelas who lived near the water never bought fish from a store. Their husbands or sons brought it home, and the caldo was ready within the hour. It was the simplest possible use of fresh fish, and the freshness was the entire point. There was no way to fake it. Frozen fillets from a supermarket did not behave the same way in the broth. They turned rubbery, released too much water, and lacked the sweetness of something pulled from the Gulf that same morning. When the fishing families moved inland for work, or when the sun stopped going out on the boats, the supply of fresh, whole fish dried up. And without that fish, caldo de pescado made no sense. You could not replicate the flavor with a vacuum-sealed bag from the freezer section. The dish was tied to a way of life, and when that life changed, the caldo went with it. A few seafood restaurants along the coast still serve a version, but it is not the same as the one your abuela ladled out of a dented aluminum pot while the screen door banged in the salt breeze. Number 13. Cocada. Shredded coconut cooked slowly in sugar and milk until it turned into a dense, chewy candy that stuck to your teeth and stayed on your tongue for hours. Abuelas made cocada in heavy copper pots called casos, stirring constantly to keep it from burning as the sugar caramelized and the coconut turned golden. Some versions were pale and soft, almost like macaroons. Others were cooked until they went dark amber and turned brittle when they cooled. In the Rio Grande Valley and along the border, cocada was sold at church fairs, school fundraisers, and from kitchen windows by women who made a little extra money selling dulces to the neighborhood. The problem was the stirring. A proper batch took close to an hour of constant motion over low heat, and if you walked away for even a minute, the sugar would scorch. Packaged coconut candy from Mexico replaced the homemade version, and eventually even that became hard to find outside of specialty shops. Number 12. Torta de elote. Not a torta you eat with your hands. This was a sweet corn cake, baked in the oven, made from fresh corn kernels, scraped right off the cob and blended with butter, sugar, eggs, and a little cinnamon. The batter went into a greased baking dish and came out puffed and golden with a texture somewhere between cornbread and custard. The sweetness came from the corn itself, which had to be fresh and milky. Canned corn did not work. Frozen corn was a poor substitute. When the ears were in season in late summer, abuelas across Texas made torta de elote as a side dish or a dessert depending on how much sugar they added. It showed up at potlucks, after funerals, and on the counter during holidays. When fresh corn stopped being something families shucked at home and started being something they bought already cut in a bag, the torta lost its reason for being. Number 11. Polo and mole verde. Everyone knows mole. The word conjures up the dark chocolate-laced sauce from Oaxaca and Puebla. But in Tex-Mex kitchens, there was a green version that got far less attention. Mole verde was built from pepitas, tomatillos, cilantro, fresh herbs, and green chilies, all ground together into a thick, herbaceous sauce that tasted nothing like its famous dark cousin. The color was deep green, almost forest-colored, and the flavor was nutty and bright with a clean heat. Chicken pieces were simmered in it until they absorbed the sauce completely. It was a labor-intensive dish, and that was the problem. The pepitas had to be toasted without burning. The tomatillos had to be roasted. The sauce had to cook long enough to lose its raw edge. A dish that demanded 2 hours of preparation does not survive in a household where time is the scarcest ingredient of all. Number 10. Discada. The name comes from the disco de arado, a plow disc repurposed as a giant concave cooking surface. Ranchers in Chihuahua and along the Texas border would set the disc over an open fire, add oil, and start throwing in whatever meat was available. Chorizo, bacon, beef, pork, sometimes hot dogs cut into coins, onions, tomatoes, jalapenos, all chopped rough and cooked together until the edges charred and the flavors merged into something greater than what any single ingredient could deliver. Discada was outdoor food, ranch food, the kind of thing men made at a gathering while standing around a fire. It was scooped into warm flour tortillas straight from the disc. No plates, no forks. The disc itself was never washed with soap, just scraped clean, oiled, and put away. Years of cooking seasoned it like cast iron. When families moved off the ranches and into the suburbs, the disc stayed behind. Without the open fire and the excuse to spend all afternoon outside, discada lost its home. Number 9. Revoltijo. During Lent, when meat was off the table every Friday, Abuelas turned to dried shrimp and nopales to make revoltijo. The dried shrimp were tiny, bought in cellophane bags at the mercado, and they had a concentrated briny flavor that filled the kitchen the moment they hit the pan. Mixed with strips of nopal cactus, romeritos greens when available, and a chili sauce made from dried guajillo and ancho peppers, revoltijo was a thick, complex stew that could satisfy even the most committed meat eaters in the house. It was not a pretty dish. The color was somewhere between brown and green, and the texture was dense. But the layers of flavor, smoky and briny and earthy all at once, made up for the appearance, making it required ingredients that modern American supermarkets do not carry. And that simple fact was enough to end a tradition that had survived centuries. Number 8. Molejas. Grilled sweetbreads, the thymus gland of a young cow, seasoned with nothing more than salt, pepper, and a squeeze of lime. In the taqueria culture of Monterrey and the border towns of South Texas, molejas were as common on the grill as carne asada. They cooked fast over high heat, developing a crisp golden crust on the outside while staying creamy and almost custard-like inside. The flavor was mild and buttery, closer to a rich mushroom than to what most people expect from organ meat. Wrapped in a corn tortilla with a spoonful of salsa verde and a few slices of avocado, moleja tacos were the order that regulars placed while everybody else stuck with what they already knew. The English name has always been a problem. Sweetbread sounds like something from a bakery, and once people learn what it actually is, they recoil. That reaction alone pushed molejas off most menus north of the border. Number 7. Chilorio. This one traveled north from Sinaloa on the Pacific coast of Mexico with families who settled along the Texas border. Pork shoulder was slow cooked until it shredded easily, then mixed with a paste made from dried ancho and guajillo chiles, vinegar, cumin, and oregano. The meat absorbed the paste completely, turning a deep reddish brown with a flavor that was earthy, tangy, and slightly sweet all at once. Chilorio kept well without refrigeration for days, which made it ideal for families who cooked in bulk on the weekend and ate from it through the week. Packed into a flour tortilla or spooned over rice, it was satisfying without being heavy. But it required a specific combination of dried chilies that most American grocery stores never carried, and the preparation took the better part of a day. Convenience killed chilorio more efficiently than any change in taste ever could have. Number 6. Chicharron de vieja. The name translates roughly to old lady crackling, and nobody quite agrees on why it was called that. What everyone does agree on is what it looked like. Strips of wheat flour dough, rolled thin, cut into rough rectangles, and deep fried until they puffed and turned golden. Then tossed while still hot in a coating of cinnamon sugar or drizzled with a syrup made from piloncillo and anise. They were crisp, sweet, and gone in seconds. Abuelas in South Texas and northern Mexico made chicharrón de vieja for special occasions and for no occasion at all. The dough was nothing fancy. Flour, water, a little lard, a pinch of salt. The frying was the skill. Too cool and the dough went greasy. Too hot and it burned before it puffed. Kids ate them standing at the counter, fingers sticky with sugar, reaching for the next one before they finished chewing. When Mexican bakeries started selling packaged churros and conchas became easier to find in American supermarkets, nobody bothered with the hot oil and the mess anymore. Number 5. Tostadas de pata, cow's feet, cleaned and boiled for hours until the cartilage softened into a gelatinous, almost translucent texture, then chopped and dressed with lime juice, cilantro, onion, and sliced jalapeno. Spooned cold onto a crispy tostada and eaten with your hands. The texture divided people cleanly. If you grew up eating it, the slippery, slightly crunchy bite of the cartilage was comforting and familiar. If you did not, it was the last thing you wanted near your mouth. But tostadas de pata were common in Mexican households well into the 1980s. Carnicerias sold cleaned cow's feet by the pound, and boiling them down was one of those long weekend projects that filled the entire house with a rich, beefy steam. The collagen made the cooking liquid gel thick as pudding when it cooled. Abuela swore it strengthened the joints. Whether or not they were right, the dish itself was honest food. Nothing wasted, nothing pretending to be something it was not. Number 4. Turcos. A rolled pastry filled with piloncillo and pecans that abuelas in northern Mexico and the Texas border towns baked for holidays, saints' days, and visits from relatives who lived far away. The dough was a simple flour and lard mixture, rolled out thin, spread with a paste of crushed piloncillo and chopped pecans, then rolled up tight and sliced into pinwheels before going into the oven. They came out golden and fragrant. The piloncillo melted and sticky inside, the pecans toasted and crunchy. Every bite was sweet, smoky, and slightly bitter from the raw cane sugar. Turcos were baked in big batches and stacked on plates covered with cloth, and they disappeared fast because nobody could eat just one. The name varied from town to town. Some families called them polvorones enrolados. Others just called them the pecan rolls. When commercial pastries and boxed cookie dough showed up in stores, the long afternoon of rolling and filling and baking stopped making sense to a generation that wanted dessert without the labor. Number 3. Cayotas, from the Sonoran Desert, traveling east with families who settled in El Paso and the surrounding valley. A cayota is 2 thin discs of wheat flour dough pressed together around a filling of piloncillo, then baked until the edges seal, and the sugar inside melts into a dark, sticky caramel. The outside is pale and flaky, the inside is molten and bittersweet. They look plain, almost unfinished, and that modesty is part of the charm. In Hermosillo, cayotas are still sold on street corners and in bakeries. But in Texas, where Sonoran families carried the recipe across the border, the tradition faded as those families aged out of the kitchen. Making cayotas requires a feel for the dough. Too thick and the center stays raw. Too thin and the piloncillo burns through. That instinct lived in the hands of women who had made them hundreds of times, and it did not survive the jump to a printed recipe card. Number 2. Puffy tacos. San Antonio claims these, and with good reason. A thick, raw corn mesa shell dropped into hot oil, where it puffed up into a hollow, golden pillow in seconds. The outside was crisp. The inside was airy, almost like a savory pastry. Filled with seasoned picadillo, lettuce, tomato, and cheese, puffy tacos were a San Antonio original that never quite traveled past the city limits. Ray's Drive-In on the west side is often credited with popularizing them in the 1950s, and for decades they were the default at birthday parties, school fundraisers, and church Jamaicas across the city. Making them at home required precision. The oil had to be at exactly the right temperature or the masa would not puff. Too cool and it went flat. Too hot and it burned before it could inflate. Most families eventually gave up and just went to Ray's. When the generation that knew the oil temperature by instinct started to fade, the homemade puffy taco went with them. Number 1. Carne seca. Long before commercial beef jerky came in a plastic bag with a brand name and a nutrition label, ranch families in northern Mexico and South Texas were cutting thin strips of beef, salting them heavily, and hanging them in the open sun to dry. Carne seca was survival food. It kept for weeks without refrigeration, weighed almost nothing, and could be rehydrated in a hot skillet with tomatoes and dried chilies in minutes. Vaqueros carried it rolled in cloth on cattle drives. Families stored it through lean months when fresh meat was not an option. The taste was intense and concentrated, pure beef with a salty chew that bore no resemblance to the sugary, teriyaki-flavored jerky sold in convenience stores today. Making carne seca required full sun, dry desert air, and the confidence to leave raw meat hanging outside for days without worrying. That last part is what ended the tradition. Health codes, suburban neighborhoods, and the simple reality of refrigeration made sun-drying meat feel unnecessary. But for generations of Texas abuelas, a handful of carne seca rehydrated in Chile, Colorado was the original fast food. These 25 dishes were never fancy. They were made from what was available, cooked with skill that came from watching and doing, not from reading a recipe. They fed families through hard years, celebrated the good ones, and turned the humblest ingredients into something worth remembering. If your abuela made any of these, you already know what we are talking about. Drop a comment and tell us which dish you missed the most. Hit that like button, share this with someone who grew up eating this way, and subscribe so you never miss another trip back to the kitchen that started it all.